The gavel of the highest court in the land had fallen, and with it, the last glimmer of hope for a reprieve was extinguished. It was a case that had captured the attention of the world, drawing lines between vengeance and forgiveness, punishment and redemption. The United States Supreme Court had reviewed the final legal challenges, the desperate 11th-hour maneuvers, and their decision was absolute. There would be no 30-day stay. Governor George W. Bush, bearing the weight of the state's decision, announced the grim finality of the situation.
The courts, including the United States Supreme Court, have reviewed the legal issues in this case, and therefore I will not grant a 30-day stay. May God bless Karla Faye Tucker, and God bless her victims and their families.
But to truly understand the tragedy of the end, we must rewind to the brutality of the beginning. We must go back to a sweltering morning in Houston, Texas, on Monday, June 13, 1983. It began with a frantic phone call to the Houston Police Department, a cry for help that would lead officers to a horrific discovery in a nondescript apartment in the northeastern part of the city. Inside, the air was thick with the metallic scent of violence. Officers found the bodies of a man and a woman, their lives extinguished in a manner so savage, so visceral, that it baffled even seasoned investigators. The weapon of choice was not a gun or a simple knife, but a pickaxe, a tool of manual labor turned into an instrument of slaughter. Initially, the chaotic scene suggested a robbery gone wrong, a random act of violence in a dangerous city. But as detectives peeled back the layers of the victims' lives, a different picture emerged. This was personal. The investigation would soon pivot from a hunt for anonymous intruders to a deep dive into a grudge held by a woman whose name would soon become synonymous with the debate on capital punishment, Karla Faye Tucker. Who was she? How did a young woman become capable of such ferocity? And can a person who commits the ultimate evil ever truly find redemption? Welcome back to the Executioner's Pen. Today, we unravel the twisted, frightening, and ultimately heartbreaking case of Karla Faye Tucker. Houston, Texas. A sprawling metropolis of over 2.3 million souls, a city of contradictions. It is the seat of Harris County, a diverse cultural hub, and the proud home of NASA's Johnson Space Center, the place where humanity reaches for the stars. But beneath the veneer of scientific achievement and Southern hospitality lies a grittier reality. Houston is a city with a pulse that beats fast and hard, and with that intensity comes a shadow. In the early 80s, it was ranked among the top 100 most dangerous cities in the United States. A place where crime could strike with sudden, devastating force. In 1983, that force struck the life of Gregory Scott Traver. It was a Monday morning, June 13th. The humidity was already rising as Gregory waited for his friend and coworker, 27-year-old Jerry Linden, to pick him up. They had a job to do that day, a contract to install an alarm system, and time was money. But Jerry, usually reliable when it came to a paycheck, never showed up. Gregory checked his watch, the minutes ticking by into an hour. It wasn't like Jerry to skip out on work without a word. Living just a short walk away, Gregory decided to head over to Jerry's apartment to wake him up, assuming his friend had simply slept through the alarm. When Gregory arrived at the apartment complex, a sense of unease began to settle in. Jerry's front door was sitting slightly ajar, a careless oversight that felt out of place. Gregory pushed the door open, stepping into the dim living room. "Jerry?" he called out. Silence. "Jerry, you in here?" Still no answer. Gregory scanned the room. Something was wrong. The television and stereo equipment were stacked oddly together near the door, as if staged to be moved. More concerning was what was missing. Jerry's prized Harley-Davidson motorcycle. A machine he had been meticulously restoring was gone from its usual spot inside the apartment. Pulse quickening, Gregory moved deeper into the apartment, checking room by room. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Finally, he reached the door to the spare bedroom. He turned the handle and pushed it open. Nothing could have prepared him for the nightmare waiting on the other side. On the floor, next to the bed, lay his friend. Jerry was motionless, his body surrounded by a dark, widening pool of crimson. But the horror didn't end there. On the bed lay a woman Gregory didn't recognize. Protruding from her chest was the wooden handle of a pickaxe, the metal head buried deep within her torso. The violence of the image was so stark, so surreal, that Gregory fled. He scrambled out of the apartment, his breath catching in his throat, and ran back to his own home to dial emergency services. When the Houston police arrived, they were met with a scene of utter chaos. The apartment told a story of frenzy. Motorcycle parts, tools, and dirty clothes were strewn across the floor, creating an obstacle course of debris. But all attention focused on the spare bedroom. The brutality inflicted on Jerry and the unknown woman was immediate and shocking. It wasn't just a killing, it was an obliteration. The murder weapon, the pickaxe, was still lodged in the female victim's chest, a macabre signature left by the killer. An officer carefully removed the heavy tool, bagging it as the primary piece of evidence. The bodies were transported to the Harris County Medical Examiner's office, where the true extent of the violence would be cataloged. Detectives turned their attention to Gregory Traver. He recounted his discovery, his voice likely shaking as he described the open door and the ransacked state of the home. He pointed out the missing items. The Harley-Davidson and Jerry's blue Chevrolet El Camino pickup truck were both gone. A subsequent search revealed that the wallets of both victims had been taken. Furthermore, investigators found a ball-peen hammer from Jerry's own toolbox lying near the bodies, evidently used as a secondary weapon during the assault. The initial theory was straightforward: a robbery gone wrong. There were no signs of forced entry. Neighbors, when questioned, admitted to hearing loud noises, thuds and banging, emanating from the apartment in the early morning hours. However, in a tragic bystander effect, no one had called the police. "I didn't hear any screaming," one neighbor might have said. "No gunshots. I just figured they were moving furniture or partying." Investigators surmised that the victims had either known their attackers and let them in, or the unlocked door had been an open invitation to opportunistic predators. But as the detectives stood in the center of that blood-soaked room, the robbery theory began to fray at the edges. Robberies are usually quick, transactional. This was different. This was overkill. The autopsy reports confirmed the detectives' gut feelings. Jerry Linden had been stabbed nearly 20 times with the pickaxe. He had also suffered a massive blunt force trauma to the back of his skull. The woman on the bed had been stabbed 15 times, with the final fatal blow driven directly into her heart. This wasn't just about stealing a motorcycle. This was about rage. This was personal. Fingerprint analysis soon provided a name for the unknown woman, 32-year-old Deborah Ruth Thornton. Her brother would later recall the devastating moment he heard the news.
I come in from my job at 5 o'clock in the evening after a hard day's work, and I get in and my phone rings, and the first thing I know, guy's on the phone saying, my dad's on the phone saying, "Hey, you need to come over to the shop." I'm like, "What's up?" He says, "Your sister's been murdered." I'm like, "No, Sure enough, she was. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe they'd kill my sister.
With the victims identified, the investigation shifted gear. The level of violence suggested a vendetta, so police began digging into the backgrounds of Jerry Linden and Deborah Thornton. They learned that Deborah and Jerry were practically strangers. They had met only the night before at a pool party. Friends who had been at the gathering told police that Deborah had come out that Sunday evening simply to blow off some steam. It was a chance encounter, a fateful meeting that would end in tragedy. Since Deborah was a married woman with 2 children, suspicion naturally fell first on her husband, Richard Thornton. Detectives brought Richard in for questioning. He was cooperative, admitting that he and Deborah had argued that Sunday. He confessed that their marriage had been rocky and that he had asked her to leave the house for the night to cool off. "I loved my wife," Richard insisted. "We were having issues, sure, but I would never hurt her." He claimed he had been home with their children all night. He was visibly shaken to learn about Jerry, telling investigators he had no idea his wife was seeing anyone else. When his alibi checked out, Richard was cleared. Police then turned their gaze to another man in Deborah's life, her father, William List. A background check revealed a dark past. William was a wealthy business owner but had a prior conviction for assaulting young boys. Currently, he was under investigation for tax evasion, and crucially, his own daughter Deborah had been subpoenaed to testify against him. It was a classic motive, silencing a witness. But despite intense scrutiny and weeks of investigation, no physical evidence linked William to the crime scene. Another dead end. Meanwhile, a separate team of investigators was delving into Jerry Linden's life. Jerry was a well-known mechanic in the area, a guy who liked motorcycles and a good time. But as they peeled back the layers of his social circle, they found that Jerry had his own enemies. One name in particular kept surfacing in interviews, spoken with a mixture of hesitation and knowing looks. Karla Faye Tucker. Karla Faye Tucker was 23 years old, a notorious party girl in the Houston underground scene, and the best friend of Jerry's ex-wife, Shawn Dean. As investigators probed the relationship between Jerry and Karla, they uncovered a volatile history that had been simmering for over a year. "They were like oil and water," a friend told detectives. "They just couldn't mix without exploding." The animosity started when Shawn first introduced Jerry to the group. Karla was unimpressed, viewing Jerry as weak and ill-suited for her best friend. The tension escalated rapidly. In one incident, Karla had returned to her apartment to find Jerry's leaking Harley-Davidson parked in the middle of her living room, staining her carpet with oil. Enraged, she had chased him out of the apartment. Over the months, the feud deepened. When Karla and Shawn took a road trip to follow a rock band, Jerry's jealousy consumed him. He broke into their shared space, found a photo album belonging to the women, and methodically destroyed every picture of Karla he could find, including the only surviving photograph she had of herself with her late mother. When Karla returned and saw the desecration, she didn't just get mad. She swore revenge. She vowed to teach Jerry a lesson he wouldn't forget. Despite Karla's urging to dump him, Shawn married Jerry in February 1983. But the marriage was doomed from the start. Just a month later, Shawn stopped by Karla's new house to pick up a jacket. When Karla realized Jerry was waiting in the car outside, she stormed out, flew into a blind rage, and punched Jerry in the face through the open window, shattering his glasses. Glass shards had to be surgically removed from his eye. By June 1983, Shawn and Jerry had divorced amidst allegations of abuse. In a final act of retaliation, Shawn stole Jerry's bank card and drained his savings, $460, which she and Karla promptly spent on a shopping spree. But the rumor mill on the street suggested Jerry was planning a counterstrike. Word got back to Karla that Jerry had hired a hitman for $300 to shoot her in the face with a flare gun, intending to disfigure her for life. Whether the rumor was true or not, it had its intended effect. Karla was furious. She was paranoid, and she was dangerous. To understand the explosion of violence that occurred that June morning, one must understand the fuel that fed it. Karla Faye Tucker was not born a monster, but she was forged in a fire of neglect and early exposure to the darker side of human nature. Born in Houston in 1959, her childhood was less a foundation and more a fracture. Her parents' marriage dissolved early, leaving Karla in a chaotic shuffle between households. By the age of 8, she was already smoking cigarettes. By 10, she was experimenting with narcotics. It was a rapid descent, accelerated by the company she kept. In her early teens, she began traveling with the Allman Brothers Band, immersed in a lifestyle where boundaries were non-existent. By the time she was back in Houston, she had gravitated towards the biker subculture, a world of rough edges, loud engines, and hard drugs. It was here she met Danny Garrett, a 35-year-old bartender and oil field worker. Danny was rugged, older, and deeply entrenched in the same chemical dependencies that plagued Karla. They became inseparable, fueling each other's addictions. Their days and nights blurred into a haze of methamphetamine, tequila, and Dilaudid, a synthetic opioid known in the streets as drugstore heroin. The weekend of June 11, 1983, was a particularly intense bender. For 3 days straight, Karla and Danny, along with their friend Jimmy Lebrant, had been awake, injecting a potent cocktail of drugs and alcohol. Sleep was a distant memory. Paranoia was their new reality. It was in this chemically induced psychosis that the plan was hatched. They needed money, and they needed to settle a score. "We're going to pay Jerry a visit," Karla decided. "He's got my pictures. He's got parts for the bike. And he owes us." The trio piled into Danny's Ranchero truck. They didn't go empty-handed. They brought weapons, fueled by the rumor of the hitman Jerry had supposedly hired. They were wired, they were angry, and they were driving straight into a nightmare. The breakthrough in the case didn't come from forensics, but from a guilty conscience, or perhaps a boastful one. Weeks after the murders, while police were still chasing leads on Deborah's husband, Karla's own brother, Richard, made a call to the authorities. He told them a disturbing story. Karla had come to him, frantic and high, admitting that she and Danny had taken care of business with Jerry. But she hadn't just confessed to a confrontation. She had bragged about the kill. Detectives, needing to solidify the evidence, wired Karla's friend Doug Norwood. They needed Karla to say it on tape. What they captured was not a remorseful confession, but a chilling account of thrill killing. On the recording, Karla's voice was animated, almost excited. She described breaking into the apartment with Danny and Jimmy. They had kicked open the bedroom door, catching Jerry and Deborah in bed. A struggle ensued. In the chaos, Danny attacked Jerry with a hammer. But it was Karla who took control of the situation with the pickaxe. She described swinging the tool, the weight of it driving the point deep into the victims. But the most disturbing revelation was the physiological reaction she claimed to have experienced during the act. In a detail that would later shock the jury and the public, Karla confessed that the violence didn't repulse her. It stimulated her. She told Doug, and would later testify in court, that with every swing of the pickaxe, she experienced intense waves of sexual pleasure. She claimed to have had multiple orgasms as the weapon struck home, a twisted fusion of rage and ecstasy that defied all psychological norms.
What did they say about that? Showing fingerprints?
No, I seen it in a picture. It had tape on it. I didn't know if they'd stick to tape or not.
They won't stick to it if we had gloves on.
Well, it's all done. I just, to tell you the truth, I wish it never would have.
Tape, so we...
They can't link nothing to nothing. No fingerprints, no nothing.
Unless somebody freaks out.
They told me that, they told me in these words, y'all are targets.
Oh, yeah,
They told us that if they had anything, they already had somebody arrested.
Carla,
Yeah.
maybe when you told me you ever stroke, was that, did you? Did you really?
Oh, hell yeah.
On the girl, too?
No.
'Cause I know you didn't hate her. Wish you could at least just took her out quick and easy.
I tried. Sorry. Did this to you, man.
I'm glad to hear you say you're sorry, Karla.
I know I don't.
I'd hate for you not to be sorry.
I love you.
I love you too, Dave.
I love you.
I love the both of you. To me, it's like the work of the devil. It's just like the work of the devil. I don't believe y'all would have ever done anything like that if the devil didn't tell you.
Yeah, probably right.
She described smiling as she walked out of the apartment, leaving the carnage behind. Armed with this confession, the police moved in. On July 20th, 1983, a month after the bodies were found, Karla Faye Tucker, Danny Garrett, and Jimmy Leibrandt were arrested. The trial began in September 1984. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They had the motive, the opportunity, and most damning of all, the tapes. They painted Karla not just as a murderer, but as a thrill killer, a woman devoid of humanity who derives sexual gratification from the suffering of others. Karla's defense team tried to contextualize her actions. They argued that she was under the influence of a massive amount of drugs, that her judgment was impaired, and that her tragic upbringing had set her on this path. Karla took the stand, her demeanor vastly different from the party girl on the tapes. She had found religion in jail, claiming a spiritual awakening that had cleansed her of her past addictions and anger. However, the jury was tasked with judging the Karla of 1983, not the born-again Christian of 1984. The brutality of the crime scene photos and the coldness of her taped confession were insurmountable. It took the jury just over an hour to return a guilty verdict. During the penalty phase, the question was whether Karla posed a continuing threat to society. Despite her pleas of change, the nature of the crime, the pickaxe, the multiple stab wounds, the admitted pleasure, convinced the jury that she was beyond saving. On September 28, 1984, Karla Faye Tucker became the first woman in Texas since the Civil War to be sentenced to death. Danny Garrett also received the death penalty, though he would later die of liver disease in prison before his execution date. Jimmy Leibrandt, who had testified against the couple and played a lesser role in the actual killings, received a 35-year sentence. For 14 years, Karla lived on death row. Her case became a global phenomenon. She became a charismatic figure, a spokesperson for rehabilitation. She married a prison chaplain, Dana Brown, and garnered support from unlikely sources, including the brother of her victim, Richard Thornton, who publicly forgave her. Even the detective who arrested her and the prosecutor who convicted her eventually argued that her life should be spared, believing her conversion was genuine. But the law in Texas is rigid. The Board of Pardons and Paroles denied her clemency. The courts denied her appeals. On February 3, 1998, Karla Faye Tucker was strapped to the gurney in the death chamber at Huntsville. Her final words were directed to the families of her victims. "I am so sorry. I hope God will give you peace with this." She then turned to her husband and friends watching through the glass. "I love you all very much. I'm going to be face to face with Jesus now." As the lethal injection took hold, the debate raged on outside the prison walls. Was the woman who died that day the same woman who swung the pickaxe? Can a person truly change, or does the weight of their past actions forever define them? This case forces us to look in the mirror. It reminds us of the fragility of the path we walk. Reading through the comments on this case, one reflection stood out to me, a testament to the divergent paths life can take. God, somebody must have been looking down on me when I was a kid. Without going into detail, my childhood was not good. Let's put it that way. I suffered all forms of abuse, but all I know is I made a promise to myself when I was 9 that I wasn't going to do anything they did when I grow up. I'm 63 now. I've never drank alcohol, never done drugs, got a degree in child psychology, and have 3 wonderful kids, 2 beautiful grandchildren. It serves as a powerful reminder that while our beginnings may be written for us, the ending is often a story we write ourselves. Karla wrote hers in blood and ended it in prayer. That's it for this episode of the Executioner's Pen Story Time. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next one.